despite Fitch's recent BBB rating with a negative outlook, Afreximbank's financial performance remains robust, as evidenced by stronger indicators, particularly in its bond performance. That's according to JP Morgan. Now, Ghana's obligation to repay its loan to Afreximbank is clear. Reports from the Ghanaian government points towards a recovering economy. This was even recognized by Fitch's upgrade of the country on the 17th of June. Now, given this positive economic recovery, it's unreasonable for Ghana to refuse to pay a loan extended to it by Afreximbank when it faced near insolvency. Now, this behavior from an African country, a strong advocate of African financial sovereignty through African-led institutions, is deeply concerning and appears ungrateful. So what does the PCS assigned to Afreximbank exactly mean? Well, joining us to discuss this is Dr. Misheck, who is the lead technical expert for AU APRM Credit Ratings Program. Welcome to the morning show. Thank you for joining us. In the introduction there, we did ask the question of what all of this means, what this PCS assigned to Afreximbank exactly means. Could you start there, break it down for us? What are we discussing here?
No, excellent. Thanks for picking on this very important conversation. I think it has become globally topical now because of this case of Afreximbank. But I would want to broaden it beyond Afreximbank. It's about the whole African financial ecosystem. So the bottom line is that in the framework of lending in the multilateral sphere, which is lending from financial institutions that are owned and controlled by more than one shareholder, including member states. So what then happens is that when there is a crisis, commercial lenders who are after return normally step back. And there is need to support some sectors of the economy, including balance sheet support in areas that may not give return to attract commercial lenders to keep on providing funding for governments, especially. So that's when institutions like the multilateral financial banks have to step in to keep a country going. So to support that framework, these institutions are conferred what is called a preferred creditor status. So it's an unwritten rule, but the assumption is that even in the status of default, the borrower will still provide or will still repay what they owe to them before they repay any other creditor, just to secure the risk of non-payment in case there's an extreme case. So that's the whole concept, in short, of a preferred creditor status.
All right, thank you so much for that, Dr. Mutize. Now, let's focus a little bit on what is being called a standoff between Afreximbank and Ghana. With regards to the status of that at least $750 million that Ghana has benefited from Afreximbank and all these issues around preferred creditor status. Can you just unpack it for us and give us some insight from the Afreximbank perspective?
Well, I want to speak from the Afreximbank perspective because I work for the African Union. So both Afreximbank and Ghana are part of our ecosystem. But let me frame it this way. We are not in any position to condemn Ghana or raise any strong word against Ghana. Remember, Ghana is our member state of the African Union, and we have been working closely also to support Ghana to improve its rating. But in this particular case, which I think has got a higher degree of exaggeration also from the media, because Ghana is a member or participating state in the Afreximbank, and they have their own obligations that they committed by signing into the Afreximbank agreement to protect the assets of the bank, and also there is a specific section of the agreement which clearly states that in any situation our participating state cannot accord a preferred or a favorable status to any non-resident institution or entity outside African member states at the expense of our own African financial institution. So I think the whole issue started when Fitch raised an objection and a concern around the treatment of the amount that is owed to Afreximbank by Ghana, which has been a contentious subject for some time now. But in our view, we have assessed all the statements that have been flying around. There is no intention of default from Ghana, which is the bottom line. So we can't talk of default from Ghana, which completely also eliminates the issue of non-performing loans with regards to Ghana, which in this case holds a substantial amount that has brought a lot of disagreements on this subject matter. So in our view, I think Fitch is in the center of it, and it has been steered by media, but most of the engagements are based on misinformation. But the bottom line is that Ghana is going to repay what it owes to Afreximbank. And Ghana is also a shareholder of Afreximbank. And if there is any area that needs to be clarified, I'm very certain that in the very near future, it should be clarified, since there is a process of negotiation that needs to be advanced.
Misinformation. Did Fitch act irresponsibly? What's the talking point here?
Absolutely. There's no question on the movement by Fitch. Fitch, adding to the contradiction that it started now, it upgraded Ghana, which is the key subject of this issue that we are discussing now. Upgrading it from selective default to jump 3 notches into B category. Whilst it is good from our member states' perspective, but it is very contradictory. It reflects as an act of wanting to make up on the damage that Fitch has already done by downgrading Afreximbank, because you can't classify the borrowing country as having improved substantially. But if you look at the bottom line of it, there is no material changes in the status of Ghana's loan situation. The key rating driver that Fitch pointed out in upgrading Ghana, which is agreement on the 13.1 billion owed by commercial creditors, it is not a substantial change to the situation that was there in October last year when it affirmed Ghana's default situation. So in our view, I think Fitch is trying to make up to a situation that it created by downgrading Afreximbank based on the same loan that it has also acted contradictory in this point I'm raising.
When looking at Fitch, we do know that this is an institution that has, of course, decades of history of experience in this arena. But I think when we're looking at this example, perhaps, would you say that this is a good example of why perhaps the African continent needs to create its own type of ratings agency so that they can use their expertise to look at countries, loans, institutions within the continent and have a better understanding of how these intricacies work? Do you think that this situation is an example of why there should be an African version of a Fitch or an African ratings agency?
Absolutely so, because in our view, there was no point of discrediting the financial capacity or financial situation of Afreximbank, which is one of the strongest institutions that is responding to the financing need of Africa. And wanting to create a scenario between the bank and its member states was, I think, another level of mischief and misunderstanding that needs to be addressed. Because if you look at the bottom line on the issues that it raised, it's clear that there is a greater level of misunderstanding and lack of appreciation of the context of risk. I've always pointed this issue that consistently in the rating agencies' report over the years, they always mention Afreximbank's in Afreximbank's rating that it's operating in a high risk environment, and also consistently use the words that it's a average rating of key shareholders is low. And that becomes a very significant factor in holding the rating of institutions that despite having strong capitalization and collateralized positions, they still can't have better ratings because of this pessimistic approach from the analyst perspective. So indeed, it does present another leverage to advance the need for having an African-based rating agency.
All right, and what impact do you foresee this ratings downgrade making on Afreximbank in a broad sense?
Of course, I think the impact has already partly been done because, as you know, that investors who advance funding through Afreximbank, which over the years has been quite on a positive stand, given that the institution has been getting a broadened mandate from the African Union to support areas beyond only trade finance. But only that issue has become problematic with rating agency, which we think that it should be interpreted otherwise, actually, as a positive rather than a negative risk factor. So raising these risky points, which to some extent are over-exaggerated, of course, it ignites a spike in the interest rate demand from investors buy into Afreximbank bond. So over the medium term, we can say that you obviously see a substantial increase in borrowing cost, especially if the issue of preferred creditor status, which is being questioned now, is destabilized. But we hope that once this issue is clarified and our member states are consistently having consensus on upholding the preferred creditor status, not only of Afreximbank, but of other African financial multilateral institutions, so that they can be able to sustain their position in saving the continent's financing for development.
Do you think this was a hatchet job, and do you think there was also a colonial basis in it? Because, I mean, this is African, an African-centered bank. And it's big news on the foreign scene, big whiplash, boom. Oh, credit rating for a formidable African bank has dropped. Owing to the successes in recent times of Afreximbank. So do you think this was an intended hatchet, job? Because from your explanation, didn't Fitch know all of this before they went ahead with that byline?
Well, I think there's been a lot of discomfort, specifically with Afreximbank. As I did mention that there's been a lot of discomfort that the bank is getting extended mandate from the African Union beyond the trade finance, which in my view should not be a negative thing. This should actually be positive, that we have a bank that is to specific infrastructural need to sustain Africa's need for financing impact project. For instance, I think you all know the situation that Dangote refinery was in. And it's an objective fact that there was no other institution that would have supported that project to the magnitude of the amount that was made available by Afreximbank in a very short space of time. And even the case of Ghana, because remember, this loan in question that we are discussing now is a loan that was advanced to this government when it was already in default. And I remember the IMF and the Paris Club actually acknowledging that Afreximbank stepped in when others would have found it difficult, especially to disburse that amount in the time period that was advanced. So not taking it as a personal attack, but from a critique point of view, it's another line that you can use to advance, because there are several discomforts that we have seen which should not be, because this bank has been very responsive in areas where Africa needs immediate impact and responding to the financing need that is actually needed, not just balance sheet support or structural adjustment programs that are maybe more inclined towards the sovereign nature, but where the impact is needed to support, especially the ecosystem of developing Africa's integration and a broader financing ecosystem.
I think we would all struggle to find any other type of banking institution that has done the work that Afreximbank has done in terms of putting forward Africa as a continent. But obviously, when you break it down into different countries, different arenas, different industries, Afrexim seems to be across the board a bank, a lender, an institution that cares about putting Africa on the forefront. And I'm glad that you mentioned the Dangote refinery, because Alhaji Aliko Dangote spoken at length about how he is grateful to Afreximbank for its support when he was putting the refinery together. So again, when we're looking at this situation, it is, I can imagine that Afrexim would appreciate the fact that this conversation is being had and that people, our audience, are able to understand the ramification of what's been happening. But for you specifically, what do you think, or how do you think Afrexim should respond going forward in its own carrying or conduct of business? Or do you think that they don't need to change anything? Is there anything that they can do if you don't? I hope that was clear.
Yeah, I think the bottom line is Afreximbank should maintain its position that any of the loans that it has advanced or it will advance in future should not be restructured, because I think there is a sufficient legal basis for that. And also from the commitments that our member states, which I think should actually be formally be brought back from into the African Union platforms to discuss this particular point specifically on preferred creditor status. So they should maintain that, and the subsequent strategy will obviously be continuing to make an impact in the projects and support programs that they've been doing, which I think if they step back, there is no institution that is actually been prepared to step into this space. So suffice to mention at this point, the African Union is actually in the process of establishing its own 3 financial institutions: the Africa Central Bank, the Investment Bank, and the Monetary Fund. And these institutions the protocols have been ratified, or has been approved in 2012. And up to now, we are still in the process of getting the necessary ratifications to be able to operationalize this institution. Yeah. And the reason why we are raising this issue with Ghana is because Ghana is currently the champion. The president of Ghana is the champion of these 3 financial institutions. So our criticism on the position of removing the preferred creditor status of Afreximbank and other African multilateral institutions, it is not just referring to the status of Afreximbank. It is about the whole ecosystem, because if we discredit one institution, it's a precedent that will discredit the whole ecosystem of African financial institutions. And investors are going to have this in their memory for long.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate you for your time this morning and the clarity you bring to this Fitch rating matter of Afrexim credit rating.